Yeah, okay. Morning, everybody. I'm Gary Chapman. I think most of you know me. We've got a fun-packed pensions full day for you, so I hope you enjoy it. This morning, we've got the dynamic duo of myself and the one-armed man over here. This afternoon, well, they must have been good last year because we've invited them back. We've got Paul and Jonathan from Mercer's. They're on the way from Liverpool, so they're not here just yet. Introducing at the top table Steve Barrett. He's our new fund director. He's not going to do an awful lot, but he's here in case you want to have a chat to him during the breaks, etc. There are no fire alarms planned for today, so if it goes off, we need to skedaddle. We'll be through the doors there, or through the doors there. We are webcasting. So if you ask any questions from the floor, would you wait till Joanne or someone comes with a mic, because we need that to be on the webcast so people can hear it. And hello to anybody that's watching. Please, somebody be watching. But if not, you can all watch yourselves back later, and just in case you're on camera. So, but hopefully it'll be just us up here. So I think, have I said everything, Joe? I think that's all I need to say for now. I'll be back later after Ian's session, and I'll call Ian to the stage carefully. Don't fall over for his first slot.
Thank you, Gary.
All right, you're welcome.
Morning, everyone. Everyone here? Or shall I say, can everyone hear me? Is that okay? There's actually nothing wrong. I've not done anything. I was just after the sympathy vote before we start, that's all. Given that the session might be a bit feisty at times. I'm Ian Baker, Pensions Manager at South Yorkshire Pensions. Looking around the room, there are people I know, there are faces I know, and there are people I don't know, and I think that's probably a sign of the times. I've been doing this forum for about 17 years now, and I've done every one except the year we didn't have a forum. And over the years, I can see the faces that have changed, and a lot of the old school aren't here anymore, so hello to the new people, and also hello to the old stages. Make one thing clear is that today isn't a workshop. It's not a day for going into the technical side of the year-end spreadsheet and all the fields that's on the spreadsheet. We simply don't have the time to do that. It's not a training course either, but it's a chance to review the process and explain the process. And also for Gary to come up later on and talk a little bit about the future. But my session is predominantly about the year-end process, how we use it, why we need it, and so on. From a technical point of view, we have in the audience Karen Roberts from headquarters. There's Karen, waving. She's our sort of UPM pensions admin system expert, and if anybody has any questions about the technical side of the returns, submitting the returns, using the returns, and the actual process, then Karen can be collared at coffee or lunch, or even after the event's finished in the afternoon. She has nowhere to go tonight, do you, Karen? Okay. So, we'll make a start. Not where I thought we were. Technology. Okay, so what we will cover today. I'm going to talk about why we need an annual return. It's a question we get asked quite regularly, given that people send monthly remittances through, and some of those remittances contain a lot of member detail, but I'll explain why. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this year's experience, following the launch of the pensions admin strategy last year, and how we fared this year, we think, as a result of that strategy. I'll talk about where we are at the moment, the current position. And then later on, my partner in crime, Gary, I'm not sure which one of us is Batman and which one is Robin, but Gary will talk about the immediate future and then a little bit about the longer term from 2018 onwards. I'm quite happy to take questions as we go through. I've got an hour and a half to fill roughly, so if you want to help me spin it out, you can do. But also there will be time at the end for questions if you have them. So we're going to talk about the past, the present and the future. And it's all about contribution returns, really. We talk about annual returns because that's been the history. The way the scheme works and the way we record data and the way we ask for data and the way employers submit data has always been predominantly on an annual basis. Money gets remitted monthly because the fund needs the money, but the actual data that we work on has always been from a monthly submission. Gary will talk about the changes that we hope to be making in the not too distant future. And this presentation is out of sync. It's because I'm using my left hand. Oh, that looks more like it. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Right, okay. So I'm obviously not the straight man in this act. Okay, sorry about that, folks. It's live in the atmosphere up anyway a bit. I want to just take you through the actual annual return process from start to finish very briefly. Don't want to bore you too much with that. But there is a point to annual returns, and I think from on the agenda you'll see that I actually headed this session, what's the point in annual returns? Because I say it is a question we get asked. But there is a point to them. There's a necessity to have these things. The process itself starts with the year end at the employers. Payroll closed down for the year end, and then by the 31st of May each year, the submission of a complete, usable, balanced, stress those words, annual return for all the people that you've employed that have been members of the pension scheme in that financial year. We need that by the 31st of May because of the statutory timescales that we have to then complete and follow in order to get our job done by the 31st of August. When your submission arrives in our office, it's subjected to a visual check immediately, just to make sure that the data on the spreadsheet is, if you like, visually complete. So there's no obvious errors, there's no missing columns, there's no missing figures, the totals are there. All that you can see looks in order. If that's in order, then the return is then submitted, if you like, to the machine, to the system for an electronic validation. And that is a much more complex issue. It's looking at all sorts of things that you can't see visually. So the system validation is an important part of this because at the end of the day, the return has to work. It has to be able to be run against the system without rejecting. The management teams who visually look at the return that you submit and submit the return for a machine validation also do a balancing exercise. So they immediately look at the total. So they look at pensionable pay, they look at employees' contribution total, employers' contributions total, they look at the 12-month totals from the remittances which our friends in accountancy provide for them. And there's a balancing job there. And we can't balance to the penny because these days, you know, employees have variable contribution rates. And we used to be able to virtually say to the penny whether the money based on the return that we'd receive was correct. You can't these days. It's a reasonable's check. All you can do these days is say the parameters of these, the employees' contributions are within those parameters. The employers' contributions you can nail down to the penny if the pensionable pay is right. because the employer has a known contribution rate. But the file has to balance, and there has to be a reasonableness check, and it's one of the reasons why the files do get rejected. If they don't balance, there are issues with them. I've put accepted and rejected in blue because if the file is accepted, we then run it against the system. But in terms of terminology, I think maybe I need to clarify what we mean when we say a file has been rejected and returned. And the reason I want to clarify this is because one of the employers this year, one of the employer's payroll agents submitted a return, and that return was rejected. And our terminology says the return is rejected and returned, but it isn't actually returned, it's rejected. For our terminology, it's recorded as returned. The actual file is not returned, it's kept on the system and deleted at the point that the fresh file is received. But I think the payroll, in this particular instance, assumed that we had sent the return containing member data back to not exactly the organisation concerned, but their administration people. So they suspected there might have been a data issue. So I just wanted to clear up the fact that where we might say on the system that a file has been rejected and returned, it is rejected, it isn't necessarily returned. And there are no data issues in these things. That's quite important, and it's a point I'll revisit later on in terms of where we communicate, who we communicate to, where the responsibilities lie for the submissions and who we deal with in relation to the submissions. If the return is accepted and it's validated and it's balanced and it's okay, then it's run against our UPM pensions admin system, the member records, to post the contributions. It's a bit of a cyclic process because it posts contributions to member records and it won't post to every record. There will be issues. Queries are generated for the ones that aren't posted, and as you know, as employers, we send you those queries to clear up and resolve. We rerun the return against the member records and then hope it posts some more and so on. And it's a diminishing cyclic process until theoretically every member gets the contributions posted. There's a big issue here about how employers react to receiving the queries and getting those queries resolved quickly to us, because as you can see from the last bullet point, we have to, by statute, issue annual benefit statements for our members by the 31st of August. So if we get a return on the 31st of May, all we have is June, July, August in order to run the contributions against the member records for nearly 400 employers, to send the queries to you that are generated by that posting process, to get resolutions from you, to re-query somewhere the resolution isn't correct or generates a further query, and then to rerun the process and keep rerunning the process in order to be in the position to then run, is it the care benefit line we then run, Karen? So we have to then post on the member records not just the contributions but an actual pension calculation, because these days under care it's not just about issuing forecasts for members, what you might get. We're now dealing with real money. We're dealing with whatever a member earns in a year. There's an actual pension account generated and awarded to that member and recorded on record. It's actual pension benefits now under care. The historical final salary legacy aspect of the scheme, that's still very much a forecast. This is what you might get, depending on what your pay turns out to be in the end. But from 2014 onwards, where it's care benefits, they are real benefits, and so they have to be right. And also people have an entitlement to receive that statement under law. So we're really, really pressed to get those out. 31st of August is not a long time to go through this process. We've got 50,000 active members, or 52,000 now, I think, Gary, isn't it? 52,000 active members, nearly 400 employers, and as Gary will allude to and show later on, our admin structure hasn't really changed over the years to cope with that. So we're very, very much in your hands, and it's extremely important that the returns that come in are accurate, they're timely, they're balanced, and they're validated, and they're usable. And that's another issue that I will allude to and come on to later on. Do you have any questions so far? Nope. So why do we need an annual return? Under the current system, and as I said earlier, it's an annual process, and we're not yet in a position to change from an annual process. And again, I don't want to steal Gary's thunder because he'll be talking to you later about this. But at where we are and where we have been for a number of years is all geared around an annual process. Under the current system, the return you submit fulfills a number of jobs for us, if you like, a number of exercises. It's an accountancy exercise because we use it to help balance the books, so to speak, in the money that's coming over the year against the money you say at the end of the year you have paid. And if that's wrong, then there's an issue. If that doesn't balance, there's an issue. There's an audit requirement here, an audit issue as well, because we are required to have data submitted from you as an employer. We can't generate that data, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Vitally for us, it's a data cleansing issue as well. It's an exercise in which gives us an opportunity to highlight all sorts of issues in terms of our member data and to contact you as an employer with queries to resolve those issues. And there's also an issue of independence and integrity. The data has to be yours. It can't be ours. We have systems and we receive monthly remittances, but we cannot generate your return for you. But just to turn things on its head a little bit, the first thing I want to really talk about in this part of the presentation is, and this is a question we've had from the floor in advance, is why can't we use the monthly remittances that the employers submit? Instead of having to wait for the year-end return and then deal with all the pressure within the timescales and all the queries that arise as a result of that annual return. Well, basically, the process has to be fit for purpose. And that's not a criticism of the way we work at the moment or the way you work or a criticism of our system. Is simply that the annual return process cannot be simply converted into a monthly process. The monthly remittances that you send at the moment are really more about the money. It's about paying the contributions into the fund on a monthly basis, giving our chaps who are represented here today in accounts the chance to get that money into the fund, to make sure there are no real issues with the money coming in on a monthly basis. But the remittances that you submit as employers vary tremendously. Smaller employers might submit almost a return, member by member, with pay and NI numbers and personal details and virtually a lot of the data we might need for an annual return. So you think, well, why can't you just use 12 of those that we submit and add them all up at the end of the year and use that? Well, they're not quite returns. There is data on there or there is data missing from those returns that we would still need at the annual stage. And some employers submit just a remittance. So it'll be, for instance, the large employers, they will submit a remittance that just simply details the employee's contributions, the employer's contributions, the pensionable pay it's been based on, and the deficit payment for that month. We can't, at the moment, accept monthly returns, even if you were in a position to give us a monthly return in the current format based on the annual process. When we get an annual return, as I've said, it generates lots and lots of queries. If we accepted nearly 400 employer remittances each month as a return and tried to post contribution from that, we'd probably need about another 200 staff, and we wouldn't do anything else on the pensions admin side except do contribution posting and query resolution each month. It's an impossible task. And again, as Gary will cover later on, any monthly posting that we move to in the future will have to be employer driven in terms of the process and the responsibility. I don't want to say too much on that. But it's a massive issue. We can't accept 400 monthly returns as things stand at the moment because we just could not simply cope with them. We wouldn't have the opportunity, and I'm sure at the moment you wouldn't be in a position either to respond, even if we were able to respond to you and get all the queries back to you from the posting. I'm sure you wouldn't be able to respond to those queries and get them resolved with us before the next month was due. So as I say, the process has to be fit for purpose. And it's not a criticism of how we work at the moment, but it just means that we cannot convert the annual process as it stands into a monthly process. It simply will not work. In terms of the accountancy issues, as I mentioned earlier, the monthly submissions are really more about the money. The fund needs the money due from the employers on a monthly basis. It needs to be invested, it needs to make a return because the return helps to keep employers' contributions down. So the remittances are more about collecting the money each month and giving our accounts people chance to do the accounts on a monthly basis for each employer, get the money invested and highlight any major issues. For instance, an employer that hasn't paid for 3 months, or an employer that hasn't paid its deficit payments for a month or 2 months or whatever. So there are major issues from the monthly remittances that our accounts people deal with and highlight to us. But it's more about getting the money in at the moment for the fund. As I mentioned, the large employers submit just a remittance with basic details. That could never be used as a return anyway. And I'll pick on you, Sean, just because we've had a lot of dealings. Could you submit a monthly return at the moment?
Not at the minute.
No.
I could do soon if you wanted me to.
But trying to just, if you like, make the point stronger is how as an employer or as the payroll agent for a very large employer, would that impact on you at the moment?
Well, it'd be a job of work.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to take it on board if you were looking to
Well, I think Gary will talk about the trialling of this later on as well.
Is that not the answer you wanted?
Sorry?
Is that not the answer you wanted?
I'm asking the question. I mean, I don't work at the employer's end and I don't work in the payroll side.
I'd be happy to work with you to try it if you wanted to do that.
Fine. I'm just trying to sort of explain, if you like, the issues that we would face at the moment in terms of the query resolution that comes out of the data we receive. And whether you could turn that round within a month, given the current setup for a large employer that has sort of 10, 11,000 members. I would say it's a big ask at the moment, but if you can tell me any differently, we'll have the discussion.
Well, if it's of any interest,
Yeah.
because as an agent we submit, I probably submit about 50 returns, annual returns, and I probably do about 3 or 4 monthly returns. So some funds are already accepting monthly returns. So
Okay.
I do that.
Yeah, and I think Gary will mention that, won't you, where we are with other funds. As I also mentioned earlier, some smaller employers do submit a remittance that is really remitted by member. by reference to individual members. But again, that the data that comes in on those monthly returns is not a full return, so we would still need something at the end of the year anyway, even if we were able to just total those 12 remittances up. None of the returns that we receive each month are complete as things stand and could not be used. But from an accountancy point of view, the 12 remittances that you submit also need then to balance to your annual return, so that we are assured as far as possible that the money we've received from you over the year balances with the money you then say you've paid at the end of the year. And believe me, that might sound a simple process, concept, but if you speak to the management teams that are here today from headquarters, the number of times that the annual remittances do not total the 12 monthly remittances that you've submitted is quite staggering. And there are a number of reasons for that, adjustments to payroll after the event and things like that, but it does cause problems. So from an accountancy point of view, it serves a function. Both our internal and external audit agents require us to have a detailed employer-generated annual return under the current system. And I say employer-generated. Even were it feasible for us to take the data from the 12 monthly remittances that employers submit and create a return, it wouldn't be, if you like, an integral or a return that was full of integrity, because we would have created it. And we can't create these things. We might as well say, well, forget everything. We'll create all the data from the member records and we'll just get on with it, But it has to be independent. Audit like us to also show from an accountancy point of view the 12 monthly remittances balanced against the return as well. And as I say, that often doesn't happen too. One of the major concerns over the last few years from an audit point of view, certainly at pensions, has been the money coming into the fund. How do we know we're getting the right amount? How can we prove we get the right amount? Well, it's very difficult for us because it's your data that's coming in. We don't know if your data is right or wrong. We don't know what your payroll is comprised of. We don't know what we should expect. So the annual returns are very much another reasonableness check, a double check against the monthly remittances, and that highlights issues. It's a difficult job. I've always wondered why, and tell me differently, why audit at the employer's end is not more interested in the money you pay across to ensure that's correct and that your accounts are correct in terms of the pension scheme membership and what you're deducting and what you're paying across. And I've always felt personally that's where the audit issue should start here. If it starts at our end, it's almost back to front, because we're working with money that you've sent us and member details that you've sent us, but we've got no real way of checking that. We rely on you. So I've always felt that the audit issue should start at the employer's end, really, to ensure that from the employer's point of view, your audit people are extremely happy that the people you say are in the scheme receiving the pay you say they've received have actually received that, and they've actually paid those contributions. And that out of the employer's coffers, you've paid the right employer's contributions and the right deficit payments. And yet, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't know, that doesn't seem to happen, or doesn't happen to our knowledge. So we never receive a statement, if you like, from your audit people saying, we're happy with what this employer has paid over the year, we can certify and sign that off. Now do your bit. Does that happen? Yeah. Does in schools? Okay.
Our external auditors will check
Yeah.
what we have paid.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. We've had this type of argument with our audit people for a number of years now, in that the expectations they have of us are almost sometimes impossible to comply with, and getting that message across has been quite difficult at times, hasn't it, Gary, in terms of their understanding of how the annual return process works and the way the the data is submitted and where that data is generated from and by who. And we do have these arguments, but maybe the move that Gary will talk about will help that in the future.
Well, that's interesting, mate. Perhaps worth saying that whilst it would be part of our external audit check, there isn't a separately signed off certification
Okay.
of that check. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask you
There
to
isn't a separate signed-off certification of that check, but for teachers' pensions there is.
All right,
So we
okay.
have to pay for a separate external audit on the teachers'
Right.
pensions return.
Well, we don't want to incur any more costs for you. But, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's obviously two different approaches to the two different pension schemes and the money that's paid into them. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And the other requirement we have from auditors is that we are required to show a signed-off balance sheet. So the management teams complete a balance sheet at the end of each year, after they've received the return, after they've balanced it, after they've resolved any queries, after they've accounted for any adjustments that you might have notified them of. And that balance sheet has to be signed off at management level and is then recorded on the employer's record on our EPIC system. So we are driven quite a lot by our audit people, both internal and external. Massively, the year-end return is an opportunity for a data cleansing exercise. You'd be amazed, or perhaps you wouldn't, at the number of returns we get each year where there are contributions for a member on there that we've never heard of. So on the return there'll be a name, a national insurance number, pay, payroll reference, contributions, etc., etc. And when we come to run that, we've got no record of this person. So the immediate thing we think about is that the employer has not submitted a starter form for this employee. So that immediately generates a query. So every year there are a number of queries that are generated as a result of the posting because we simply don't have a record for people on the returns. That means we then have to come back to you to say, look, you've told us this person was in the pension scheme from your annual return, but we haven't got a record from them. Can we have the appropriate starter form, please? So then we have to get a starter form from you, then we have to retrospectively build the record, generate the record and build the record, and then retrospectively post the contributions. And so immediately you're already behind in the cycle. Given the timeframes we talked about earlier, you can see that these things have an impact. They don't only have an impact on us, but they have an impact on you because you've got your own workloads. It highlights as well changes in membership, not membership details, but the person's membership in the pension scheme. One of the things we try to do, and we've historically done, is run pay comparison reports when we post this year's contributions against last year's contributions. And where pay varies on the new record or on the new return, where pay varies by 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever, within certain parameters, it generates a query because there are a number of reasons why a person's contributions and pay can change in a year. A lot of them we know are genuine. People can have promotions and so pay increases or increments. Can take people's pay upwards on the scale, if you like, and may report on the parameters. Blinded now. May report through the parameters that we set, but there might be very genuine reasons for any increase in pay. But it might also be that that person's changed their working record, their working pattern. So they might have gone from part-time to full-time, or within the full-time band, they might have gone from 30 hours to 37 hours. So the pay has increased, but we haven't been told that they've changed their working pattern. Where pay has gone down and contributions gone down, that person might have left. That person might have reduced their hours. That person might have gone on maternity leave. That person might have been on sick leave. So as soon as there's a variation in pay compared to the previous year, in our minds, as pensions people, it generates an awful lot of questions. It says to us, eye up, pay's gone down, but from the record we've got, there's no clear indication of why that should be. So we query it, and you will be familiar with the queries that we send through. Person's pay is reduced or appears to have reduced from last year. Is there a reason? And again, to resolve those queries puts an onus on you to respond quickly, but it also puts a big onus on us because of the timescales we've talked about in terms of getting member records generated and cleansed, and then annual benefit statements sent out. So it's a big issue. It highlights where people have left and we haven't been told. Now, with retirements, across the piece, it's very good. Most employers where somebody's actually retiring and there's an entitlement to benefits, we tend to get told quickly because we know that if those type of documents don't arrive quickly, then the member who's expecting the pension is soon going to get on the telephone and start moaning. So, but it's the early leavers, maybe. The leavers who aren't always entitled to immediate benefits, they've just resigned or they've gone elsewhere. When we get a return where there's, as you know, in the column date left, so they've left within that year, and we haven't had a leaver form, we then ask you for the leaver form. So again, if you'd have done it at the time, it would have all been resolved, but now it has to be resolved retrospectively, and it has to be resolved at a time when we're trying to resolve lots and lots of other queries, and you're also busy with lots and lots of other queries. So the message that we've tried to push for years is if your data is correct and timely and accurate throughout the year, the less year-end queries you'll get. But as things stand, we still get an awful lot of queries generated by the annual returns that we then have to come to you to, which delays the whole process, especially if we don't get that return till the very end, on the 31st of May or very close to the deadline. It then really closes down the timescales that we have for dealing with the issues that come out of the returns and to get the annual benefit statements out. And of course, if we don't get the annual benefit statements out, we're in breach of our statutory duty. I don't know how many of you were here last year when the pensions regulator spoke, but this year the pensions regulator has got a very keen eye on local government nationally because of the problems that local governments suffered last year. Last year was the first year-end exercise under care, and it was also obviously various funds around the country with different software products were having to have updates for the new scheme. In South Yorkshire, we had more problems than that because we'd also migrated not just to a new pension scheme, but we'd also migrated to a new pensions admin system as well. So we had more problems than maybe a lot of funds. But nationally, last year was a really bad year for local government in terms of meeting their statutory obligations for the issuing of annual benefit statements. And although the regulator was quite lenient and understanding, he made it very, very clear that this year there would be no excuses. This year he would be keeping very close eye on local government. And this year we had to achieve what we should achieve under statute. So failure to achieve means we have to theoretically self-report. This year we haven't had to self-report because we've done a good job. Thank you particularly to all the employers that submitted usable returns by the deadline. It was really very, very helpful. And we did appreciate that. It made life a lot easier. But we still had some that didn't. And even the good employers, even the ones that submit a return on time, even where the return is balanced and usable and it's validated, that return will still generate queries, and those queries still have to come back to you to be resolved. And as you can see, the timescale is very, very tight. So it is a massive data cleansing exercise for us, the year-end return. And as I said earlier, there is this issue of independence and the integrity of the data that you submit. It has to be employer generated. We can't generate a return from the monthly remittances that you send us. It would be suspect from an audit point of view. It's a case of where do you draw the line? If we take your data that you submit on a monthly basis and then we manipulate that data in any shape or form to produce a return, the audit trail gets lost. Where's the integrity? Where do you draw the line? Where do you stop? It has to be independent. It has to be your data. It's employer members. It's your pension scheme. And the data you supply to us for us to use has to come from you. We can't generate it. We should not be intervening in any shape or form in the data you send us. We can't manipulate the returns, although sometimes, as a very last resort, depending on what the issue is with the data, we do, in an emergency, make some amendments, changes. But that's very rare. We can't do the totalling for you. As soon as we put a total in there, that if you haven't put a total in, it might seem a minor thing, but if we put a total in, who's to say that's the right total? We could put a total in there just because that's the total we've got from the 12-month remittances and we want to make it balance. As soon as we intervene, as soon as we manipulate any of that data, it becomes suspect. It becomes potentially inaccurate, or it becomes potentially manipulated to suit our means so we can get our job done. So we can't do it. We shouldn't do it. We can't change the data on there. It's not just about monetary totals, but it's about actual member data as well. So we can't be putting data in on your behalf. Again, it calls into question the integrity of the data that we're using. And from that, it all flows down into the actual pension benefits that people are earning and being awarded under the care system. It has to be right. You would expect yours to be right when you come to retire, and you would expect yours to be right each year when you get your annual benefit statement, and every member has that right. They have a right to expect a process that is full of independence, full of scrutiny, full of integrity, and confident that the data we are using to produce their annual benefit statements is correct and accurate, and that is something they can rely on, and that's how it should be. Conscious that we're getting through this a bit quickly. Of course, yes. Can you wait for the microphone, please?
From North Notts Pension Authority, when they sent our template for us annual return out, it was pre-populated, so we knew how many lines or how many records each employee had.
Okay.
So we could do as own data cleansing. We knew what was missing before we ever sent it in.
Okay.
And it's since they got their new system that it sent that out to us, which we found really beneficial.
This is
North Notts.
North Notts.
With this Bassett Law contract.
We've actually looked at pre-populating the templates for some employers in terms of name, NI number and folder ref, but we have an awful lot of members with more than one job, and that's where many of the issues come in. Some of the big employers have lots and lots of members with more than one job, and each job in pensions needs a separate record. And it is something we've looked at, but something I don't think we can use at the moment. I mean, Gary, I think you've looked at this as well, haven't you? And Andy, our IT people, have looked at this.
You've said it there with regard to the difficulties in trying to establish a match. Send out information pre-populated. There's every danger that the people that you get send back where they've got more than one employment don't match, or we get it on the wrong record and so on. And it can work if we fully data cleanse with each other to start with, and then basically keeping that up to date. And that is one way of doing it. I think what I'll come on to is another way of doing it, and which covers all aspects rather than just that one. So I'm not saying that that's not a particularly good idea. It just had problems for us. So when we thought about it, we decided not to do it.
The other thing that North Knots do,
You can request a report. So rather than it being pre-populated onto the template, you can actually just pre-request a report, and they'll send you the report of what they are holding, say in February, March,
Okay.
so that you can be prepared.
All right. Not sure how that would work. I can't stand here and say we could do that because I'm not sure what work it would involve for us. The Knots Fund is a smaller fund than ours anyway. North Knots is probably quite a lot smaller. I'm not sure how many employers they have, but I suspect, my gut feeling is that to try and do that for nearly 400 employers in this fund would be a big ask for us at that time of the year.
Yeah, North Knots
You know.
accept that you're a bigger authority,
Yeah.
obviously, when I'm down there, because I've been trying to plug your EPIC system, because they're wanting to try and do one similar. So I've tried to say what benefit that is to them. So it's just with dealing with two separate actual local authority pensions authorities, that the way the two work differently. And I know the size is
Yeah.
a contributing factor.
Trying to be diplomatic here as well. There is a difference around the country in the quality of what different funds do in terms of annual returns and contribution posting, and the data that then gets sent to the actuary for the triennial valuation. And I think the actuaries are here today at some point, and we'll be talking to you this afternoon. What our actuaries have always said, because of the lengths we go to, which might annoy you as employers because we're pretty pedantic over stuff, but because of the lengths we go to in terms of the data cleansing side of things at the year-end return, our data that then goes to the actuary, each valuation, is pretty good compared to a lot of funds around the country. So we have probably better data and less queries as a result of the way we work at the moment than the majority of funds around this country when their valuation time comes. But I'm not in a position to comment on what other funds do at the moment in detail, obviously. Okay. Are there any other questions at the moment? Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about this year's experience with the annual returns. And again, I think I'd like to reiterate thanks to all the employers that made the effort and submitted their returns within the deadline that we were able to use, because that's helped us enormously this year. For those of you who attended the forum last year, you will recall we introduced the draft pensions administration strategy, and I personally talked through that last year at this event. So for this year, this was the first annual return exercise under the pensions admin strategy, and those of you who were involved in the consultation from last November to February, and those of you who did attend this event, you'll remember me speaking to you about the introduction of financial penalties for employers that failed to meet the deadline for annual returns. There were other aspects of the pensions administration strategy that also could incur penalties of some sort in the future. But what we said quite strongly is that for all other aspects of the pensions admin strategy, we wanted that to become, if you like, introduced over time, because we wanted to give employers the chance to get the training, to get the understanding, to receive the support and assistance that we could provide over the next year or whatever, and that eventually most of the penalties in the pensions admin strategy would only be extreme last resort penalties. We wanted the pensions admin strategy to encourage employers to engage with us in terms of understanding their duties and obligations and under the pensions regulations. And that's what we hoped. But we were very, very strong on telling you that whilst the rest of the admin strategy would come in gently with support and training and help and assistance, etc., there was no lead-in for the annual returns. The annual return penalties would commence from the 1st of April this year. And that for this year, any employer who failed to meet the deadline would incur a financial penalty as a result. Now that financial penalty is £250 immediately for failure to submit a usable balanced return by the 31st of May. One of the questions we've had frequently, and again from the floor this year, is can't you extend that deadline? Why is that deadline so tight? Well, I think from the timetable I showed you earlier, and the 31st of August deadline for us issuing annual benefit statements, you can understand why we need that 3-month period, that 3-month window in order to get everything resolved and cleansed and run so that we can get the statements out. But what I would say is that around the country, the deadline in many funds is 30th of April. So we are actually quite lenient. We give you till the 31st of May, but elsewhere it's very often the 30th of April. So how would that impact on you? If we move to the 30th of April, what would you all say? No? Help? Is that a big ask for you? Yeah. I mean, I've had comments made to me saying that things like, well, we concentrate on our other returns first for other organisations or for other schemes like teacher schemes. Or why is your deadline so tight? I mean, I'm trying to get some feedback from you here. What impact does the 31st of May have on you? For us, it's quite lenient compared to funds around the country, and yet we still have many, many, many employers who do not submit that return till the 31st of May. Is there a reason for that? Is there a commonality in that? Are there issues that lead to that delay? Given that the March payroll for most employers will close maybe the 3rd week in the month of March. So in effect, there is April, May, and some of March in which to get the returns to us. What are the issues?
Other deadlines, other. We've
Okay.
got 2 funds that we have to.
Yeah.
2 pension funds we have to facilitate, but then other deadlines in relation to other work. I would suggest that any local government will have all their increments and the pay increments to put in. You've got your end of year return to do for HMRC and then moving everything over. Systems upgrades, if you want me to keep going, I can. But April, it's easy for you to say, well, April, you've completed March's pay, but then you start in the new year. You've got all your accountants doing their year end, wanting information, additional reports, and changes. It's just a heavy month.
Okay.
April is manic, and then you get to the end of April and you turn around and that 31st of May deadline's looming.
Okay. And yet, you see, from my point of view, looking from outside, I see some employers getting a return to us very, very quickly, and then others, historically and traditionally, it's always on the last day.
Yeah, Easter, May, Springbank, leave.
Yeah, I mean, the
School
Springbank
holidays.
fell on that weekend this year, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's everything. It's not one thing that can be moved. It's just it's the resourcing of it. Losing staff.
I'm not being
gaining
critical
staff.
at this stage.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand the issues for you as employers. That's all.
That's it. I can carry on going if you want, but I'm sure you're not really.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll not move to the 30th of April then.
We never were.
No, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think 31st of May just gives you a false sense of security that you've got time to not move on. Not says end of April. Yes, it's a benefit to us because we can do one first and then we can tackle the other one the next month. But 31st of May, when you've paid in middle of March, you think, oh, I've got time. And it's like getting ready for your holidays. You think you've got plenty of time and then you've got to be off. So I think if you know what your deadline is, unfortunately, your actual company has to respect that as well. They've got to help you to give you that resource to be able to do it, rather than just thinking you've got forever. Also, you're dealing with your information as it's happening. So,
I mean, I don't think we have an issue with the 31st of May. It's a deadline we've set for many years now.
I think just where this is going without, I don't know whether you were going to say this, but just in case, is basically if you're leaving it till 31st of May, that's fine because that's what we've set. It's when it's wrong. Then that's the problem. So if you're making sure that by the time we get to 31st of May, it's going to balance, it's going to include everything it should, and so all the fields are filled in correctly, and that is not a problem whatsoever because that's what we've set, and we weren't planning to change it. So that's not an issue. It's when it's wrong, then it's going to be late because by the time then we look at it and then establish that it's wrong, we're going to send it back to you and it's late. So it's maybe, we're not talking 30th of April, is if you're in any doubts, is just build a bit of a buffer in to give us time to get it back to you, for you to get it back to us before the 31st of May. And, you know, it's tempting, it's like the holidays, it's like me and my own work and stuff like that. You do it at the last minute. And then it is tempting when you have got that deadline. And just like my own work that used to be wrong, then this is the case that we find here. So that's just the point I think that we're getting to with regard to the deadline.
Yeah, I was actually building up to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No.
We didn't work together.
You
on
can be
our
the bad guy. Yeah, I mean, as Gary said, the issue is if you leave it till the last second, now that there are financial penalties, because the pensions admin strategy says you have to submit a usable, balanced return by the 31st of May, not just submit a return. If it's wrong, if you leave it till the last second and it's wrong, you've got no recovery time. That's the issue. And then you are inevitably into the situation where by the time you submit a usable, balanced return, it's late. So leaving it till the last second these days is a bad idea, both in terms of the work it leaves you to do afterwards and both in terms of the fact that it can lead you to have a financial penalty. I was saying that the financial penalty is £250 immediately for missing the deadline, but that increases by £100 a week for every week a usable return is delayed in being sent to us. Now, the penalties were never meant to be revenue raisers. That was not ever on our cards at all. It was never in our thoughts. And that's why, compared to a lot of funds around the country who also have a pensions admin strategy, our financial penalties are quite mild, quite low. But it was really to try and focus employer minds on the deadline and the fact that there would be a consequence for missing it, to try and strengthen the importance of the year-end exercise in employers' minds, to help us get our job done, to help us meet our statutory deadlines. But it was never about raising money. We'd rather have all the returns in by the deadline and usable than raising some money for you, because we're not going to use the money. It's not going into our budget. All we're going to do is put it into your pension revenue account. So it's money in the bank for you at the valuation anyway. It's not our money.
that was one of the questions I was going to ask, where the revenue was going.
Yeah.
But the other one was also for people who didn't attend last year's conference, how visible did you make the application of penalties to people? You reminded people that the 31st of May was the deadline. We got emails, but nowhere on those emails did it actually say, do remember, there will be a fine if you don't do this year. So if you weren't aware, then, and you made a mistake, then you did incur the fine.
Okay. There are a couple of threads to that, I think, because we didn't launch, but we introduced the concept of the strategy at this forum last year, so about a year ago. What we said is on that day, that was the start of the consultation period. So from, was it the 27th of November last year or 24th of November? The last week in November anyway, we launched the consultation period. Now that consultation period ran till the end of February. And during that consultation period, every employer was sent the pensions admin strategy for comment, and it was put on Epic. Are you an Epic user? Yeah. So it was placed on Epic, and bulletins were also placed on Epic, so that people at the employer's end were aware of the strategy, were aware of the implications, and all through that consultation period, it was made very clear that this was employers' chance to comment on the strategy and give us any feedback. So the bulletins that went on Epic were in addition to the emails that we sent out as reminders. I mean, you know, if we failed somewhere to remind people that there were penalties, then I'm not sure what more we could have done, because it was quite clear in the build-up that failure to or that part of the strategy was being introduced immediately, and then we did everything we could to remind people that the deadline was approaching. And we even got criticised for that, you know, because for other reasons that I'm not going to today.
I appreciate that, and I've got no arguments with the overall strategy and the penalty for that matter. But when you were sending people reminders, reminding them that the deadline was coming, there was no mention of, oh, remember this time, this is the first time we're implementing this. And we also have to administer teachers' pension, and they're very good at telling you, if you don't send us this tomorrow, we're going to charge you interest on this, as a constant reminder. That was all.
Okay. I seem to recall that at least one of my emails sent out reminded people that there were penalties, but I'll have a look at those. But anyway, if we didn't do enough, I'm sorry. I feel we did. So yeah, the money isn't going into SYPA coffers. It's not for our use. It's not added to our budget. The money raised in total. Sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
To what you were saying, and I support what this lady said about the emails. I certainly wasn't aware of them and wasn't here last year. You talk about a usable return. Can you just, for the interest of those people that weren't here, yes, just define what usable means?
Well, as I said earlier, the first thing that happens is there's a visual check carried out. So if it fails the visual check, if there's data missing, or it's obviously formatted incorrectly, or there are missing totals, anything that you can think of that you could look at and see instantly on a return, if you were looking at it, that is wrong, means it isn't usable, because we can't fill in the gaps. We can't manipulate that data. So first of all, it has to pass the visual validation test from the management team concerned. It then is run through a machine validation. If the machine validation throws it out, then it means it can't be used. So it's not a usable return. So it has to be able to be run against the system. The third part of that is the balancing of the whole thing. If the balancing issues that we identify are so great that it casts into doubt the integrity of the data that you've supplied on the year-end date, on the year-end return, then we have no option but to reject it and say, look, it doesn't balance. There are issues with this. Sometimes you can explain the differences quite quickly. There's been some adjustments after payroll's closed. There's been some adjustments to members' who've left just before or on the cusp of the year end or joined on the cusp of the year end. There can be little discrepancies that are easily explained and quickly resolved. But very often, and speak to the management teams concerned, they'll confirm this, very often there are major balancing issues against what you say you've sent over 12 months and then what you say you've sent on the annual return. And we're in no position to be able to say what those discrepancies are and why they've occurred. All we can see is a discrepancy. And if it's major, it means that there's something wrong either with somebody's pay, and if somebody's pay is wrong, their benefits are going to be wrong, or the contributions, or the contribution rate. There can be a whole raft of reasons why an annual return doesn't balance to the 12 monthly returns. And yet, in simple terms, if over the 12-month remittances you send, that's what you say you've paid, why doesn't your annual return say that's what you've paid? And the issues are, let's just say you're £1,000 out on contributions. If that £1,000 refers to 2 members, and we don't know, but if that £1,000 refers to 2 members, that's £500 in contributions for each member. That's major. That's a major issue if that's what it is, because it obviously then says there's something the matter with these members' records, and the potential effect on their benefits can be quite dramatic, and their benefits are going to be wrong. If it's £1,000 discrepancy and it's £1 per member, because you've got 1,000 members in your organisation, then it's less of an issue. But we don't know, you see. All we know at that point is there's a £1,000 discrepancy on employers' contributions or employees' contributions, etc. Or if the pensionable pay doesn't balance to what you said you've paid people over the 12 months. If the pensionable pay on the year-end return is different, then it casts into doubt whether you've paid the right amount of employers' contributions. We're not in a position to make guesses about what the discrepancies are, so we then have to come back to you. So the return, it has to be visually correct immediately, no obvious visual omissions or errors and format. It has to then pass the machine validation, and then it has to balance. If it fails any of those 3 issues, it's not a usable return. Is that okay?
I see. And obviously, we do tend to get our returns in on date, and we try to get them as early as we can do. I hate microphones. Is it worth issuing like a bit of an SLA on your side, say, if you get a return to us by the end of April, that we will turn it around by a set date, or just to give people an understanding of how long they need to allow? I mean, we allow that buffer and we get it as soon as we can. But if you can say, we will assess and machine validate return within 4 working days on submission, or if you get in by date 1, we'll have it back to by date 2, just so people have got that feel.
I absolutely appreciate that. It is our absolute priority when we receive a return to look at it on the day it's received, and if it's visually okay, to then run it through the machine validation and to start the balancing. Sometimes the balancing exercise can take longer than the other 2 bits because you're looking manually at figures and trying to work out what the issue is. But it is our absolute top priority when we get a return. The issue we get is with 400 employers, a team of 6 people can receive 20, 30 returns on the same day. That's the issue we have. So it's very difficult to give a guarantee that we'll turn that return round in 4 days. I would hope most of the time it doesn't take 4 days. And I know from experience and personal dealings with them, the teams do take this very seriously. They do look at them immediately that they come in. But if they get a lot on the same day, it's difficult to do it that day. But our aim is to do it the day it's received, not within 4 days.
Right. So, I mean, the other thing is, if you say if you've got it by the end of April, it will definitely be back to you, because that seems quite a fair process. And we return 70 to 80 returns. So I think we try to stage our academies in first, and then the larger employees towards the tail end return.
If you got us a return by the 30th of April, we would have no issues with that whatsoever.
We'll work on that.
What date do you actually send
Sorry.
Send your returns out, because we, as soon as we got it, we tried to start pre-populating the stuff so that as general data was correct, it was just the figures that needed to go on.
Yeah.
When do they actually normally come out? I can't remember.
The template.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet template.
Yeah.
I think we got it out in January last year, was it?
Yeah.
Can't remember offhand. We try and get it out as early as possible. There's a couple of issues here because
It's just that we're balancing ours monthly.
Yeah.
So we've got our own records and our own spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if that template was out, we could keep that template up to date from the information that we're keeping on our monthly check.
There's a number of issues, not all of them in our control. And it's a balance between trying to get a template out very early to give employers the biggest and best opportunity they have to have a look at what they have to submit and think about how they're going to get that data out of payroll and into the return. But we have to be aware of impending regulation changes, and also the template we use has to meet the requirements of the pensions administration system that we use, and very often there are software updates coming for that as well. So it's a balance between issuing one as early as we can and then having to revise it for reasons outside of our control, or leaving it late until we're sure there are no software updates to the software provider's system or any regulatory changes coming out.
In the information that you're wanting in each column that you're wanting probably will not change too much, but you think you're storing the information throughout the year that you're going to require based on the previous year's template, and then you find out there's another 2 columns and you could have been gathering that information throughout the year.
I've got a slide to come on to when I'll show you what we're aiming to do this year. If that's okay. Yeah. We have a deadline in mind, or we have a timescale in mind to get that template out to you. Okay. Lost my thread now. Where were we? Penalties. Yeah, not revenue raises. So I think we've dealt with that then. So the penalties were meant to be an encouragement. They were meant to sort of focus minds on attaining the deadline. And I think the results for 2016 were actually more than encouraging. Now, how much of that was down to the strategy? How much of that was down to, if you like, the publicity surrounding it following the forum last year and the consultation? How much was down to the number of reminders we sent out about the annual returns, about the bulletins we put on Epic? I'm not sure, but I think the returns were, or the results were quite staggering compared to previous years. If we look at 2015, as a fund, we had 313 employers with active members in the financial year concerned. Of those 313, only 161 submitted a return by the 31st of May, which is barely half of the fund participating employer membership. That's an awful lot when you think of what I was saying earlier about we've only got 3 months in which to get the annual benefit statements out, given that the year was a difficult one for us anyway, following the migration to the new pensions admin system. 141 employers missed the deadline, with the latest submission being received on the 27th of September, which is nearly a month after we should have sent the annual benefit statements out. So you can see that was an impossible task for a number of those employers. But 141 to miss the deadline, it's a big number. If we'd have had financial penalties last year, then we would have raised some cash. And believe it or not, 11 employers did not submit a return at all, no matter what the contact we made with them, no matter how we encouraged them, how we chivied them, how we moaned and groaned at them and reminded them, they just didn't submit a return. Where do we stand when that happens? You know, some of these employers' payrolls are based down in London, in the south. You can't go and knock on doors. It's not as simple as that. All you can do is keep contacting them, But if they ignore you, you're powerless. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to introduce the pensions admin strategy as quickly as we could, to give us more powers, if you like, but also to deal with the annual return issue starting this year. Because of our experience in 2015, it was not a good experience at all. It wasn't a good experience across the country nationally, as I've already said, as we know from the pensions regulator, but it was particularly bad in our fund. So it means that over 48% of the fund in 2015 missed the deadline. So we're on the back foot before we even start. In the end of March 2016, we had 346 employers. So quite a few more employers, and we've got even more since then. But 319 submitted a return, a usable return, by the 31st of May. I have no idea whether that is as a result of the pensions admin strategy, but I'm also convinced it's not just a coincidence. But it was a major, major result for us, and a massive, massive improvement on the previous year. As you can see, I think that's quite a staggering result for us. 27 employers missed the deadline this year, which was only 7.8% of the numbers of employers we have. And the latest submission was on the 9th of September. To be fair to some of those employers who were late, I know they had problems, I know they had issues, and I know they tried. And I know that there were difficulties for some employers in terms of the resources they had available or didn't have available, or the understanding that key people had left, and so on and so on. But even so, only 27 missed the deadline this year, and we had no employers that didn't submit a return at all. So overall, I look at that slide and think that was a raging success this year.
Can I ask a question about the performance of outsourced payroll?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see you were speaking
I
then.
want to ask
Sorry.
a question about the performance of outsourced payroll
Yeah.
providers. From someone who suffered from that the previous year, and I was probably on the list of shame and took it in-house, and hopefully I'm on the right side now. But did that improve their performance and their returns?
Outsourcing the payroll.
Yeah. No, did the outsourcers improve? Because historically, as an employer, we've had problems with the outsourcers trying to get them to submit the returns to you on time.
That's a really interesting question, actually, because the experience over many, many years is that outsourced payroll, the performance isn't consistent. Some outsourced payrolls do very, very well. Some outsourced payrolls do abysmally poorly, and there isn't a pattern to it. And we have, I think within the room, we've got organisations that outsource the payroll. We've got organisations who in-source payroll from other organisations and do the payroll for them. We've got payroll agents. So we've got perhaps the whole spectrum of people involved in this issue in the room today. And there isn't really a pattern. It very much depends on, I think, the expectations of the employee and organisation concerned who have outsourced their payroll and their sort of service level agreement, if they have one with that payroll provider, and where the pensions admin side of things sits within that service level agreement, and what import is given to it, and whether the outsourcing employer understands the implications of outsourcing the pensions admin, the payroll function from a pensions admin point of view. That's key, obviously, because the payroll agent taking on the contract has to also understand the obligations that they're under in terms of providing information for the pension scheme, and I don't think they always do. So there isn't really, I mean, it is a really interesting question, but there isn't a pattern that I could say to you, yes, outsourcing your employer improves your pensions admin position. I couldn't stand here and say that. But contrary to that, I couldn't stand here and say outsourcing your payroll function worsens it either. It's very much down to the individual organisations concerned, the service level agreements they have in place, the understanding between the two organisations of the pensions admin requirements, the duties, the liabilities, the statutory nature of the scheme and its requirements, and how much import is given to that when the outsourcing is done.
Of the 27, can you recall whether they're primarily in-source or outsourced payrolls?
I can't. I can't. No, there isn't. There isn't a pattern to that. Some are in-house and some are outsourced.
Yeah.
They are mainly smaller employers. So as I said very early on in this presentation, there is an end result and a point to annual returns. And the end product and the whole point, apart from the data cleansing and getting records of, the whole point is that we are then able to meet our statutory deadline of the 31st of August and issue all our members or all our eligible members with an annual benefit statement. So this year, the end result of the process, based on the results on the previous slide, was that we were able to issue 44,500 statements by the end of August. So we met the statutory deadline for 44,500 members, which I think was pretty good. And that's not just down to us. That is as a result of the efforts of all the employers that submitted their returns on time, and whose returns were in a good state and didn't require much resolution in terms of the numbers of queries generated, etc., etc. And we were then able to issue a further 1,074 in the second run. So overall, this year we were able to issue annual benefit statements to 96% of the membership who should have received one. Now that compares historically to about 84% is our average, I believe, in past years. And that 84% hasn't always been issued by the 31st of August. So it's 84% at the end of the year, really. By the end of the year, following the year that we should have done them in, we've managed to issue 84%.
I'm not going to like this, but I want to challenge what you've just said. I know that our return was submitted, fully completed, on time. Therefore, I would have expected to be in that first run, 44,500. My staff weren't. Very definitely weren't. We didn't get our pension statements until October. So I don't believe that I'm the only employer sat in this room whose pension statements were late either. So I'm just wondering why you're so confident about your figures. Thank you.
We issued the statements on the 9th of August to the printer. So we complied and we issued them to the printer. The printer messed up. And that has been a really big thing for us, clearly, which we've not publicised, but it's the printer let us down badly. I think you might be aware by the statement that you get that we try to cover all angles and we put an awful lot of logic into the figures that get put in the statement. So if you've got more than one job, for example, it tries to combine it so that it becomes a document for the individual that it's as clear as possible as far as it can be when we're talking about pensions. And we, up front, the printer we've used for many years, we went and discussed them with them. They'd done statements like this before, but there was some additional logic due to the care scheme and everything else that we needed to put in, which we discussed with them. By the time they arrived and got it, and bear in mind the printer does take business from other LGPS funds, all with the same deadline, we complied with our part, got the information to them, they then just couldn't deal with it. To the point where, in the end, they had to put in manual processes to envelope statements and everything else, and that started to take the time. And I believe they even outsourced some of the job even further on to enable it to get out even when it did, which was a huge letdown for us because clearly, you know, we did our part of the bargain, we really did. And then we were let down at the end. For sure now, we're starting this process for this year very much earlier. We're talking to different printers as well as the same printer to try and ensure that we get the service that we require and that they hit the post boxes of the people who are receiving them before the end of August. That is our aim. So yeah, quite a bit of a play and well spotted. I mean, because I was sat waiting for mine. Yeah, and I was sat waiting for mine, you know, and I'm sort of saying to Joe, well, where is it then? And then all of a sudden it becomes apparent that we've got an issue. So a bit out of our control, but I just felt that from a practical point of view, we did achieve our part of the bargain, and it wasn't worth just trying to say to everybody, to the regulator particularly, well, it's gone out and then it's because of a printer error.
So 2 points to that. The electronic statements, were they tied up by that at all, or did they go on the correct date?
Joe might be able to answer that question.
They're roughly the same. Roughly the same time, because the statements, because of the complex information that we had to put in, that was the issue with the statements. And again, like Gary said, that is something that we're looking to even change the style of the statement for next year to make it an easier process for the printers. But yeah, they did get them a lot quicker, because if you're online, if you register online, you do get your statement quicker than the paper copy.
Yeah, and the other point was, obviously, in this day and age, with channel shift and where we should be, are we doing much to try and move away from paper statements and getting people to adopt electronic for cost saving and sort of environmental reasons? I appreciate a lot of our membership, especially the people who are drawing pensions, aren't going to adopt that, but are we doing anything on that front?
Yeah, we are, and we have been for many years. We took a hit because we, as LGPS funds go, we were well ahead of the game really on that, and we had under our old system upwards of 17,000 people with email addresses, and we were actually actively ensuring they got electronic communications. When we shifted systems, we had to switch off the online service for a while, and if you were a member of it, you'll remember the gap that we had, where we had no online exposure whatsoever. When we put the new system out there, we've had to start recouping, because everybody had to re-log in and re-register and everything. So there's been a bit of drag there on that, and certainly we're only up to about 4,000 or 5,000 now, and that is inclusive of pensioners. So when it comes to the electronic communication side of things, we've still got work to do to get people back on board. We have got email addresses though, and certainly we ensure that we're contacting with people to try and ensure that they do that. We're not taking the step as yet of forcing people, and a number of colleagues up and down the country are seeing that as a way just to save money, and to just say to members, your statement's online, log in if you want to look at it. And put that in a newsletter or put it in an email if they've got email addresses. What you find with that is people don't look at them, and we don't want to just go on that front at this point. It's not that essential that we actually cut down that printing cost just at this point in time, but it's something that we'll keep monitoring. But the push is to keep people registering. Another letdown with the online system is the fact that at the moment for active members it doesn't have a calculation. So all you can do is look at your member records and any documents that are on there, which is a bit boring, and it's not something you'd perhaps want to do on a regular basis anyway. And we're struggling with our software provider to get that to work. But once we have got that to work, then there is a bit of a more reason for scheme members to actually log on, because then they can start doing forecasts for themselves at different ranges of dates, because the forecast here only picks up the 31st of March that's just previously gone. So what we want to do is to make sure that members can do a series of different types of calculations, and once that is there, then maybe we get more people on board, and then it starts to generate itself. But yeah, we are definitely in the current century, and we want to push that as far as we can.
What I would say is, I represent a number of employers for payroll purposes, and a lot of them are doing channel shift now, and they've got a big push for it. So to me, it's an opportunity. I'm sure they'd all be more than willing to sort of put the pensions message as part of that communication package to try and get the uplift for you as well. So
Yeah.
I'm saying on behalf of them, I'll check with them. But I'm pretty sure they'd be more than comfortable to do that. So if it's something you want us to work on.
No, that's cool.
Well,
That's very, very helpful. And the other side to that coin as well is we have an employer system, Epic, as you know, but we're hoping to develop the employer side further, and I'm going to come on to that later. So it's a twin thing as well. So it's employers can be able to do things more themselves. So if we've got queries, for example, is that it's linked to our system, so it effectively our workflow doesn't end with us. It fires off to you. You get an in-tray, you get a message from us, you clear it, it gives us it back, and it's a seamless process. And that's something else that we want to work with you on.
Okay. Can I just return to the lady on the front table here? Would you give your organisation details to Joe? Because I'm interested, if your return came in as you say it did, why you appear not to have been in that first run, so I'll check that out for you and get back to you. Well, I don't think it has, because we did 2 runs, and I don't think the first run was delayed as far as October, was it?
It was my
September,
statement came
yeah.
in September, late September. So I think.
Yeah. Well, I'd just be interested to check for you anyway, just to make sure.
Okay.
Okay. So on to the current position. The current position is that we are still on annual returns and are likely to be on annual returns for the next couple of years. Gary will explain more in his session. Returning to the issue about when we get the template out for employers, the aim at the moment is to get that out by the 31st of December, get that onto Epic for employers to have a look at, and have a look at the requirements, the data requirements on there and the fields. I want to support the issue of the template this year with a full guide to the completion of the year-end return, rather than just to be supplemented by the notes on the spreadsheet, which I personally feel are a little inadequate and could be much better. As you appreciate, it is an exercise to write these guides, and at the moment I'm typing left-handed and writing spidery, scrawly stuff with my left hand, but I will get onto that for you. I think it is something we need, I think it's something we can improve, and I think it's something that will help you. Sorry, yeah.
I said I weren't going to say anything. You know how I understand why your template's completely locked down, but we, and I don't know if anybody else has an issue, if we've got a spreadsheet that we copy and paste our information on, if once you've got it on that template and we've got a number of lines and we think, no, them 2 lines need to be amalgamated because it's one job on Epic, although they may have 2 contracts, we can't alter it. We've got to go back to as raw data, and then we've got to re-put everything back on. So if you just want to or you realise somebody shouldn't be on, or somebody new should be on, but you want it in a specific order, you've got to start again. Whereas as our other template, for an MPA, we can sort it in just like a normal Excel spreadsheet. We can do it in any order, and we can add lines or remove lines. I understand why it's locked down,
Yeah,
though.
there are good reasons for it, for the fact that it is locked down. The spreadsheet itself has some integral calculations built into it that works from the data that you input. I'll speak to our IT people, and Gary and I will have a chat about it, but I suspect it is what it is, basically. If you know.
Yeah, I just wondered if there were any way if you could like request a password, you know, to unlock, just so you can do certain things, not removing formulas and things, but yeah.
I've made a note, so in strange writing.
Hi Ian, sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Given the big pensions explosion and changes that have happened in the last couple of years, and there's obviously a lot of new staff, are you planning to do any sort of training for year-end returns? You know, for people that are sort of sometimes maybe might be guessing and do, because it will happen. It is a very large spreadsheet, and it might, I'm just thinking we're all right, but for other employers, it might just be quite useful to have a workshop to work through it.
I absolutely agree. In past years, and I think it's a sign of the importance and complexity of this whole issue, is that, as I said earlier, I've done every forum for the last 17 years, and I guess at the majority of those forums, at some point in the day, I've spoken about contribution posting and annual returns on most of them, and it is an issue, and we have had workshops at the forums in the past. We simply didn't have the resource and the time to do a workshop today, and it wouldn't have been appropriate given the mix of people here. Yeah. But I think it would be a really good idea to have some workshops, but I think we would have to run them from HQ and get people to come to us. We couldn't visit various employers given our workload at the moment and our stretched resource. But I do think it would be a really good idea for people who are interested to come along and attend a workshop that we run at headquarters in Barnsley. If you support that, Gary.
Fantastic idea. Yeah. People to come. That'd be great. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Training at the moment, I mean, we've always been big supporters of training, in trying to offer training to employers and support, and part of the pensions admin strategy was the fact that we wouldn't impose any of or most of that requirements from the strategy on employers until they'd had the training and the support and the assistance they needed. And this is part of it, and this will help us as well. So we'll look to get something arranged in the new year, if that's okay. And I suppose that covers the last bullet point there of addressing any particularly problematical areas for employers. So if we run some workshops on the year end, it'll be an opportunity to go through those with you as well. So the current position is that 27 employing organisations have been invoiced, 27 have appealed. I simply handed those appeals over to Gary, who's dealing with them. Obviously, we've had people who've given reasons, mitigating circumstances, best efforts, etc. But I need to stress at this point that it isn't enough to simply submit a return by the 31st of May. If we allowed every employer to simply submit a return by the 31st of May and then dealt with and say, yeah, you've achieved the deadline, but then every return was unusable, where would we be? So it has to be a usable, balanced return in order to avoid the penalties, and that has to be with us by the 31st of May, earlier if possible. I think I've just switched that off. Huh? Questions from the floor that we've had. We already have the information. Why we require it again? Well, I think I've explained that the monthly remittances don't contain the information we need, and why we can't use the monthly returns that we do get. I think I've covered why we have such a tight deadline, why teachers apparently seem to be much more relaxed about it. They're an unfunded scheme in terms of having an invested pension fund. Are they not more relaxed about it? Are they more stringent? Oh. Sorry? Late deadline, but not more relaxed. I think you now hopefully understand why we require so much detail and data. We do appreciate that some of the data is difficult to supply from payroll, but we don't set down in regulation what data we require. All we ask is the data that we need to ensure that the member records are correct, and that we're able to do the appropriate benefit calculations and award people the care pension and prepare the benefit statements that people are entitled to on an accurate basis. And why do we need the 2008 pay figures? And that is because of the legacy final salary provisions that we have. As you know, benefits up to 2014, to the end of March 2014, are still linked to your final salary. And therefore, in order to provide a forecast in terms of the pre-14 part of people's membership, we have to have a pensionable pay figure based on the 2008 definition, which is different from the 2014 care definition, in order to provide that part of the benefit statement that relates to final salary benefits. So we're not asking for it to be awkward. We're not asking for it just for the sake of it. We need it to ensure that the statements we send out are as accurate as possible. And I realise that does cause problems, but we do need it. I wanted to very briefly mention a couple of communication issues that we appear to have come in for some criticism for. Relating to contributions, we do send out an awful lot of emails and bulletins between sort of January and March, and then between March and May, to remind people, remind employers about the requirement to get the year ending quickly, etc. But I just need to explain that it doesn't matter who does your payroll or who does your admin or whatever. The relationship on the pensions admin point of view is between us and the employing organisation, and the employing organisation has the responsibility to ensure that whoever does their payroll gets their year-end return in. But we don't always know, A, who does your payroll, because they change, and B, we have to deal with the employer because it's the employer who has the responsibility. Now, we've taken on board that sometimes we need to email some of the larger employers who do more than one payroll for organisations in the scheme, to give them a heads up about any messages that are going out, and we try and do that, and we admit, yeah, we should have done a bit better in the past. We don't always understand the implications from that customer service point of view. But at the end of the day, our responsibility and our duty is to communicate directly with employers who have the responsibility. I'll just quickly skip over this because I'm almost up to the end of my time. But from a valuation point of view, and because of a call I took last week, I have to be clear on this, that from a valuation point of view, the information that gets sent out on the valuation does not get sent out to the payroll agents. It gets sent out to the employer. It is the employer's responsibility then to liaise with their payroll to ensure that whatever action needs to be taken before the start of the next year, the new contribution year, is communicated to their payroll agents and is put in place for them. But our communications on valuation are with the individual employing organisations. Okay. Sorry, I've rushed the last bit to finish on time. So thank you all for listening. Hope I've not bored you too much. Is there any further questions? I'm having you banned for next year.
Sorry. You know your communications where you send your queries out? Is there any way that they could be filtered and put on through Epic on a particular person? Because we get messages from different people because of job shares, and you may answer a question and it goes into somebody else's inbox. Have you got a centralised...
Which communication now are we specifically
any
talking
queries?
about? Queries?
Yeah. I don't know if you're covering Epic at all within this session. But I might deal with like 4 or 5 different people, and I get the same question coming from different people, and I've answered somebody else. And I just wondered if the complete message thread and query thread could be per employee through Epic, so that anybody who's, if a query is generated, and I admit, reminders, I ain't got a problem admitting that, because we've got so many historical queries, and I could be going back, sending information to somebody, and it could be like 4 months before they realise there's a further question, and then I've got to get my head back round my answer. I just wondered centralising it.
There isn't a method at the moment of centralising that and providing a bespoke system or service, if you like, to each employee. But what I would suggest you do is have a word with your management team at SYPA HQ and discuss the problems you have with them and see whether there's anything locally you can do to help you.
I mean, within our company, as emails, accounts,
I mean,
you know, we've got one that's just purely accounts or payroll, and they flag up, so everybody's got access rather than personal inboxes.
Okay. Probably have a word with Shirley before you go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any more?
I'll be quick, because I know some people need to get to the toilets. just saying as it is. Right, I've asked this through our regional office, but we deal with a lot of multi-academy trusts, and they're pushing for a pooled employers rate. Is that something that's on the cards, or you can give an update on?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I'm just making sure I'm on. Yep. Yes, we are going towards that at this valuation. That is a possibility, but it's pooling in the terms of, for a multi-academy trust, the total rate that they pay. So for them, they can have a single rate and a single deficit lump sum if deficit is appropriate to them. However, it's not true pooling in the sense that all will be together and all liabilities will not be added together permanently. Behind the scenes, we will still monitor each employer separately and ensure that their rates are calculated independently at each valuation. However, but from a payment perspective, will allow you to pay one payment across. The difficulty that you've got with all this is that academies can join and leave multi-academy trusts, etc. So it's a case we still need to keep their independence from that purpose. But if a trust, and everyone agrees in that trust, because the trust just wants to pay the money over and deal with things on behalf of each of the academies within that trust, then we're okay to go along with that. I have a paper which I've got and sent out to a few people who have asked on that subject. So if anybody else in the room wants that, just let me know, and I'll let you have a look at that paper, because it covers all the pros and cons and thought processes around how we arrived at doing it that way. But that certainly is an option from 1st of April for anybody that wants in trust to do that. Oh, it's also covered in the funding strategy statement that we sent out as well with the provisional valuation results. It's a 44-page document, the FSS, but within that there are different sections, and one of them does pick up on that point.
Sorry, I'm one of those. Can I just, because I missed a little bit at the beginning.
Okay.
You said that if you've got each school within an academy trust and they've all got the different rates and they've all got the different deficits, that you will actually be able to pay the one deficit?
Yes, one payment.
And the one employer's percentage?
Yes.
What process would I or my manager have to do to sort that out?
Well, basically to let us know. I mean, we just need to be aware of that. We're at a position at the moment, and you're going to find out this afternoon, and hopefully people in the room have seen the provisional valuation results too. So when Paul talks this afternoon about the all fund results, it then obviously drips down into each individual employer and their results, which I've sent out to 290 of the 390 employers at the moment. So there's still some missing, but we've sent most of them. Within that is an individual rate per school, per academy. And where it's a multi-academy trust, then what we can do from that, once we know if you're interested in that, and it's in the funding strategy statement too, because we're consulting with you on this, so it's like you come back and tell us, then we will come back to you with the amalgamated rate. So you could have 5 academies and it'll be 15, 13, 14, 12% across them or whatever. And we'll come back then with an amalgamated rate for those, and then a sum, which is the deficit lump sum, that then wants to be divided by 12 and paid over on a monthly basis. And then that's what you would do for the year, and clearly, well, if you've looked at the results, they step up each year over the 3-year period, they would step up accordingly. So that, if that makes it easy from an administrative point of view for you, then fine. But you won't be getting an amalgamated accounting disclosure. So you would still get, if you're doing your FRS 102, if you're still doing that, you'll still get a separate one per school for that. It's just an aid towards making the payments that you send to us simpler. But we will still need, behind the scenes, identifiers of people who are in each particular school, or academy, should I say, for our purposes of making sure we update the records and everything else. It's pooling light, if you like. It's not the full-blown thing of adding everything together, but it is something that hopefully administratively makes things a little bit easier for you.
Can I also ask, sorry, can I also ask what would happen if you had any other schools that became part of your academy trust? Would it all be looked at again at the April date, or would it be?
If you added and took away, yes.
Yeah.
We would have to review clearly, and that's the real point, that we're not putting it together and forgetting all the stuff behind the scenes and saying this is one employer. I mean, life would be easier for us if we had academies as one employer, a multi-academy trust as one employer, because it will be one rate, one return and so on, and life will be easier for us all. But the fact is, in life, that these academies will be moving backwards and forwards into different trusts and so on, at which point it makes it then difficult to start looking at the deficits that are available for that particular academy, because if it's moving somewhere, it's got to take its share with it. So we need to track what its share is and keep an eye on that. But clearly, we will allow for movements during the year, because we know that that's still happening all the time. Legally they are, but for the pension fund purposes, within our scheme rules, we can separate them out and so to do. So I mean, we've been through this with DFE and everything else, who really wanted to push the pooling aspect of it, but we are able to do what we do within the pension scheme regulations.
Last question, honest. What about centralised staff? We have, say, the executive head may sit over all schools within the MAT and is not employed by any one of the schools. It's becoming more of an issue. And
well, we are looking at that at the moment, and certainly we think that a MAT can now be an employer in its own right. Whereas at the moment, with the big multi-academy trust that we've got, we have people who work for the MAT, so they don't work in any of the schools. They're actually attached to one of the schools in order to be in the pension scheme. So we have that situation already, but latterly what we are getting is MATs setting up on their own, and the scheme rules do allow them to be in the scheme, and then going out and getting the schools. Which is a different way of looking at it. It's another kind of industry that is growing up around all this. And at the moment, there is the Scheme Advisory Board at national level have put out a job to PricewaterhouseCoopers, who are looking at the whole aspect of academies in LGPS. And I was at a conference in Torquay last week or week before, and one of the things that they are looking at is, well, whether should we have a separate fund entirely for academies? Should we regionalise academies so that, you know, we perhaps would have one fund take on the whole of them, because they are still expanding. The figures that we've got for employers are increasing all the time, and it's putting a burden on pension funds from an administration point of view, as well as the academies themselves. And so I think that behind the scenes, whether it's going to be a revolutionary change, I don't know, but something is going to happen as a result of this report that comes out. And in the room, there was we were all pensions managers, so there's nothing worse, like a room full of us. But effectively, there were mass sort of disagreements between some wanting all the liabilities to go and go somewhere centrally, and then others were saying, no, hold on a minute, cash flow of the fund, if you took all our academies away, there would be a lot less contributions coming in, but all the deficits still remaining, and that could impact on other employers. So it's not an easy situation, but in relation to people centralised, then that is coming, and we're looking at requests as we receive them. Do you want coffee? Go for coffee. Right. Yeah.